I'm literally walking in to a club, never been a technical director before.
Football is not an easy industry to get into. So how did a young South Asian scout rise to become one of the youngest ever technical directors in world football?
By the real top players, I mean like Jude Bellingham, for example, the most work I've ever done on a player.
Yousuf Sajjad started his career as a volunteer scout at Brentford. He then went on to work for Chelsea and Arsenal, two of the best football academies in the world.
You would have just outrageous moments in the game where you're thinking this is not normal. If there's ever a criteria you want to build off, it would be him.
Last year, Dutch club FC Den Bosch approached Yousuf to become their new technical director. This made him the youngest technical director in Europe.
You could see that he was built different.
One of the pioneering South Asians to hold a senior management position in professional football. We met with Yousuf to learn about what goes on behind the scenes at elite football clubs and what it's like running a club as a technical director.
The number one mistake footballers would make would be My name is Yousuf Sajjad. I've previously worked as a scout at Arsenal and Chelsea. My most recent role is technical director at FC Den Bosch, and I'm doing perspectives with Rising Ballers.
Can you tell us a bit about your upbringing and what made you want to pursue a career in football? Where did it all start? Set the scene.
So I grew up in West London. 3 older sisters, mum, dad. When it came to pursuing a career in football, I grew up in the Invincible era. So being a massive Arsenal fan, of course, passion for the game. I played 17, 18 years old. I realized I wasn't playing at a high enough level for me to pursue a career as a professional. But my ambition was to work in football. I didn't know how, I didn't know what, but it's something that I wanted to do. I then saw a vacancy of a volunteer scout at Brentford. Applied, had a conversation with the head of recruitment, and was fortunate enough to just start.
Were Brentford in the Championship at the time?
Yes, yeah. So and to be fair, like probably at the time they were one of the best academies in London, I thought anyway. And it proved to be the case because they had so many players that came out from when the academy closed. But yeah, it was almost like then completely different. Instead of analysing games, it was now going and watching grassroots games, going and watching local tournaments, under 9s, under 10s, under 15s, like different ages.
And this is like quite a part-time passion for you, right? At
yeah.
Your time, you're working a job and you're making time for football, right?
Exactly. And I was, the balance wasn't very good because I was spending more time I was like cancelling some of my shifts to go to watch a tournament. And I was working at Argos. So it was like you put on your red shirt and in the week, and then on the weekend, you're going to watch a game in your Brentford tracksuit.
Part-time Argos work.
Yeah, exactly. So it was a bit crazy. But even when it got to the stage where I was doing that, the kind of conversation with my parents kind of started to become a little bit like, okay, you're spending a lot of money out of your own pocket. You don't have a car, so you're now traveling buses, trains, dropped out your masters, doing this football thing. Like, where are we going with this? Like, where are we going to see you actually have a job? And I reached out to so many clubs on LinkedIn, to be fair. I can't even remember how many, but in the end, I got a reply from Chelsea and Reading. And initially went to have a conversation with Chelsea. Even that in itself was like an experience. Like, it was like, wow, okay, I'm going to meet Chelsea. And in the end, they said, look, we'll keep your CV on file, but we'll let you know if anything comes up. And you know, when you hear that, you think, okay, I'm probably never going to hear from them again. Great experience anyway. Chelsea, and amongst that period, then call me back. I have a conversation with them again. And then at this point, they want me to come on board as an academy scout in the West London area. So now it is writing reports. It is following players at different clubs. So following players at Brentford to buy.
Can Can you give us an idea of what that environment at Chelsea Academy's like?
The biggest thing that really took me back was just how incredibly focused the club is on winning. Like this winning culture of like, we don't care if it's under 9s, under 12s, under 15s, whatever it may be. Like, we're going to win the Youth Cup every year. We're going to win, like, and it's not winning over development, because it was developing players to win. And I think that was different for me, like being in an environment like this, especially right from the off in the start of my career. And probably the thing that stuck with me the most as I continued. But that's kind of what took me back the most, is like, wow, this is really a lot about winning. And we have to win the Youth Cup this year. Otherwise it's a failure. Like almost like that kind of environment. In that season, we looked at like Brian Broby and Ferran Torres and Eduardo Quaresma. And that was actually the season, because we signed Ethan Ampadu and Billy Gilmore the season before, and that was the season where we signed Ian Matson and Pierre Ekwa. And then the following season after that, I then got the opportunity to lead in terms of the recruitment analysis department. There was also then some really good interns that I worked with and managed, that helped also on the structural basis. It gave me a little bit more time to focus on kind of ad hoc projects that can just help us be better in certain departments, certain areas, and also travel and watch games. We had also then built our international scouting department as well. At that point, we then went for the real big players, because we had, again, like a good scouting team that worked very diligently across both. By the real top players, I mean like Jude Bellingham, for example, probably the most work I've ever done on a player. Really? In that season where we tried to sign Jude. But just, we had reports on him from when he was an under 12 all the way up to under 16.
So he was at Birmingham at the time.
Yeah,
right?
So we had like 62 reports from like 25 different scouts.
Really?
And so then when we got to a point where we felt like we wanted to sign him, it was no different to every top club in the country, but it was like, how can we make what we present to him different? And so it was like, okay, we have now the content that we need from under 12s all the way up to under 16s from a reporting perspective. Let's try and create trends on what's remained the same for him as a player, including his celebration, because there was also moments where you would have that as the same as what it is now. Yeah. But also at the same time pick up what he has developed, and what he still needs to develop. And then we then attach that with footage as well. And we had like a real long video of like him playing as an under 12, 13, 14, all the way up, highlighting those traits, playing for England as well as Birmingham City. And then at the end, like we would put him on a FIFA reel in a Chelsea kit. And so we're trying to think outside the box, really. So that was kind of what I spent a lot of my time on doing, is the end part where we're making the decisions. We're now presenting information to players, collecting that information and making it as unique as possible so we can get the player over the line, basically.
When did you first come across Jude? At what point?
He was always on our radar. Like, we had target lists from the moment when I first came in. He was always on our radar as someone that is a real top talent to keep an eye on. Of course, when it came to recruiting, he was obviously outside the distance in the younger ages. Got to under 14. We obviously had a full-time schools program, so it was easier for us at the time. He didn't want to move. Yeah. And we continuously just followed him. He was like the player that we always rated highly and was always on the radar. He had a slight dip in like the under 15 season, I think it was. He was going through growth. He was different aspects of probably what affected performances. But yeah, after that, of course, he shot through. Like, it was like under 16 years old, he's playing first team. Like, so he obviously got out of it very quickly.
What do you think separates him from other players?
mentality.
Really?
Just different.
Yeah.
And without even knowing him, you could see that.
Yeah.
And I think it was the way he would approach games as an under 16 playing in under 21s, for example. Remember, I went to watch him one of the games. It was like literally pouring rain, like he's still in his shorts, t-shirt, like ready to compete. And you can just see this guy not only has quality, but he's also here to compete and progress. And I think that's for me what would separate him from a lot of players.
So it's more like the mentality than the talent, you'd say.
Yeah. I mean, he had the talent. We knew he was in an elite bracket and he was always improving. But really, what I would say was different about him was just you could see that he was built different.
So why? What happened? Why did he end up not signing for Chelsea?
I think it was just a time where there wasn't really there wasn't a pathway. Like there just wasn't many examples at that point where he could say this would be a good move for me to join. And to be fair, you understand it in the end. Like he obviously chose the right path for himself, what he's doing now. But yeah, at the time we also had like Tino Angerin, who obviously was at the time flying, Mason Mount, players in his or in and around his positions that were also of a real good level. And it's not that he didn't want to come in and compete, but it was almost like just trying to think how he may be thinking at the time. Of if they're not making it at this point, then maybe I need to pick a different option.
Yeah, you mentioned there was a discussion between like Wan-Bissaka and Reece James, right?
Yeah, so that was because it was more looking at the right back position, and at the time it was an area that we had obviously at the time players that were potentially going to be moving on very soon in terms of their age, and then it became about, okay, what is the best option in the mid to short term, but also from a long term standpoint. And that was then where the discussion came up of, is it worth going and investing that level of money in a player where we have Reece James in the building? And to be fair, yeah, look, the choice was obviously made that we stick with the path of Reece James.
Yeah, why do you think you guys chose to stick with Reece James?
I think probably in the end, not that money was ever an issue, but I think it was like we could best maybe spend this elsewhere, because the difference between the two at the time, it wasn't like if you're bringing in an Wan-Bissaka at the time that he was miles ahead of Reece James and he's going to make steps much quicker than Reece. So you then kind of ask yourself what's worthwhile here for us to do. And then that was then in the end the decision. So the initial conversation I had at Brentford was with the head of recruitment, who also then went to Arsenal. And then he kind of reached out to me and had a conversation regarding doing a similar role.
You obviously made that move. If a player was to move from Chelsea to Arsenal, it'd be quite a big deal, as it has been in the past. How did that go down, leaving from a staff perspective at clubs? You're essentially moving to Chelsea's rivals.
I had a decent enough relationship with everyone that I'd spoken to or had a relationship with at Chelsea. So from a personal standpoint, I think a lot of people that I was close with were happy for me in that regard. But yeah, look, there's always that rivalry, whether it comes to players, staff, or whatever. So I'm not sure it went down well when it came to senior staff. But I think, look, in the end, it was an opportunity for me to make a move to a club that I've supported pretty much all my life. I was always grateful for the experiences that I've had at Chelsea, and probably until the last day of my career, I'll probably use Chelsea as a foundation for my education. It just felt right, but you could see like his level of talent is unique. It was like you bring Jude to the table and it's like, yeah, we've been there, done that. Like it's destined for big things, just because of his level of talent. Like he was a joke.
So you mentioned chatting to Per Mertesacker early days. What was it like working with him at Arsenal? Did you learn a lot from him? What kind of presence was he?
Just a real good guy. Like character-wise, just happy, always smiling. And I think this is the vibe he gives off is, of course, work is work, but like we're in a career path that we've chosen that we can also enjoy. Yeah. And I feel like that's probably one of the things I learned with him, being around him the most, is like you don't need to be so tense all the time, and like sometimes it's just good to enjoy the moment. Yeah. And it was good to be around someone so big. Yeah. In the game, to have that opinion on things as well. When it came to work, it was diligent. It was like, okay, we need to work in this way. But when it came to being relaxed and enjoying moments, I think that's one of the things probably I didn't have prior to that. I kind of learned that being around him more and more. And again, to this day, probably, especially in my most recent role, probably helped me the most as well in the end.
What was his approach to sort of football like? What did he want from you in terms of like recruitment and stuff?
We had a model when it came to the pillars that we were looking at. I think it was heavily weighted on a lot of the aspects that we would imagine for a club to be looking at. But I think what was really important for him was the personality and the person that you bring in, and how they contribute to the bigger vision around the club. And I think that for me was, in the end, it became a real criteria for us from a recruitment standpoint of, yes, we analyze the player, but we also analyze the person and get to know as much detail as we possibly can when it comes to that as well. But education was also massive as well. And I think it kind of links into his own career as well, where he spoke about, education being really important for him, and how that got him through some of the moments he's had in his career. But it made sense as well at the same time.
When you're scouting, other than the obvious, like what are you specifically looking for in players?
It's crazy how like what you're actually looking for can change depending on your role, because I have to think back as to what I would look for as a scout compared to now being in my most recent role as a technical director, and how that would change. Like as a technical director, you're speaking more about the culture, the vision that you want to try and create. You're thinking more always about the longer term, the goal of bringing in a player. What does that contribute towards the vision? Yeah. Whereas as a scout, you're more looking at performance potential. How can this player impact on the team that you're bringing him for, whether it's under 21s, first team, whatever it may be. So my criteria has kind of changed a little bit, but it's also very position specific as well, and dependent on the type of position that you're looking at. Overarching, I think a lot of the stuff that I would get from being around Per and Arsenal in particular, but also around Chelsea and the experiences I've had, is personality, winning mentality, and having the drive, the motivation, without sounding cliche, almost like how far are you willing to go? Yeah. And that for me was obviously difficult to analyze when you don't know someone, but trying to take bits in a game where you would see that, but notice it.
Yeah. I think finding like the fundamental level of talent to make it in football, like physical talent, is obviously a rarity, but it's actually not that difficult to find in London. The thing that I found really difficult is finding the players that have the physical talent, but also the mental talent. And I think the mental talent is actually way more rare. It's not really a question, but what are your thoughts on that? Do you agree, disagree?
Yeah, I do agree. I think it's rare, but like it's not hard to find that within yourself when you start working in football. Like, it's not like now, tomorrow I'm going to focus on being a better person or having a stronger mentality. Like, my feeling is that I've seen players come in with the talent and that be the basis, and then the rest kind of grows depending on their experiences. And I think that's some of the things that, especially working in the academies at Chelsea and Arsenal, is what they wanted to influence the most. Is getting them in as young as possible. That being one of the reasons where you can influence certain aspects of their footballing quality, but also give them what they need to shape them as a personality and develop also their mentality as well. That's why a lot of the successes, like, and I say a lot, most of them, came from players that were recruited at pre-academy level. From the generations that we speak about, like the Mason Mounts and the Bukayo Saka, and like they start off real young in these academies, or have started off real young. It's not like if you haven't, you can't make it and you can't develop that. But there's a lot more examples of that, because you're able to influence every part of what you want to influence without taking away the personality of the person and the player. That gives you then, in the end, the outcome that probably you want as a club. When
you were at Arsenal, obviously they've gone on to do like very well under Arteta and are progressing nicely, and could do something big this season. Like, did you see that in the making at the club? Did you see the progress the club was making in your time there?
Yeah, it was. The time that I was there, there was probably more like turbulent times in terms of results, more so than anything. Yeah, it was like, initially it was great because they win the FA Cup, but then there was like this period where there was a real period of struggle. And to be honest, again, relating it back to my own experience now as a in my most recent role as a technical director, I think I got the most from that period, because it was almost like, it doesn't necessarily mean that everything is going to fall into place just because you've had a bit of success at the beginning. And I think the patience that Arsenal showed and the senior management at the club showed through that phase is the reason why now they're reaping some of the rewards. Because you could see that Mikel was a top coach. Like, you can see that the way that the first team were working was of an elite level, different to what maybe we had seen previously. It was just having the patience during that period and making the adaptations that you see that you need to make at that period for you to then continue to see, because it's an evolving process. You start somewhere and then you will go through phases of transition, and some clubs won't allow you to get to the next phases because maybe they will also lose sight of what they agreed to in the beginning. Because of the results, which is understandable, the pressure, everything about it. But I think what Arsenal did really well during that phase was keep the patience and the trust in the process. And that's a part that really helped me in where I then went next.
You described it as like a turbulent period where you felt like that you learnt the most. Has anything specific from those times sort of come forward?
Just the drive and the motivation for the staff to continue. Like, I didn't link too much with the first team at that point, but there was a real crossover with the way the buildings are when it comes to the 18s, 21s and first team. And of course there was tense periods when it came to not winning games, but you could never see that it was affecting the work and the process.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things that really kind of in the end stood out as well, for even when I look back at it now as well, at some of those moments where you think, okay, they literally worked through that period.
Yeah. So you were probably there around the time where like a lot of academy players kind of broke through, like Nketiah, Smith Rowe, Bukayo Saka. Were you there around that period when they sort of transitioned? What was that like? Why do you think those boys were able to sort of establish themselves at Arsenal, you know, given that you worked with them pretty much firsthand?
I think the first thing was that they were good enough. And I think when it comes to the talent that they would have, of course, when you're trying to build a first team, you want the best players in your squad. Yeah. And I think it was very apparent that they were good enough to be part of the first team selection. In particular, Bukayo, I think when it came to the point where he obviously broke through under Unai, but you could see like his level of talent is unique, and Mikel, from what we were seeing at that moment, was very much willing to continue his or their development, and allow it to also benefit the first team as well.
What did you find the key differences between Chelsea and Arsenal?
Yeah, I think probably things that just kind of stood out to me was on a financial level. There was a point where Arsenal could compete, but just chose not to. And it was more down to kind of being principled and making the right choice for the club. Whereas at Chelsea, it was like, we want the best players and we're gonna get them by any means. And there's not really a right way of looking at it, in my opinion, because both have their reasons. But it was just different. Like where we have a scouting list to go and get the absolute best players, and we want to go and get them because we want to add to a great squad that we have within our youth team and also potentially further. Whereas Arsenal would be in the market for similar level of player, but they would draw the line at a certain point to say, okay, well, we're not going to now go to this level. In the end, like it was, if we can't compete, then okay, we have to be creative. The players that we brought in are still good enough. It's just maybe we looked at it from a different angle and also got players that maybe weren't on the radar for Chelsea and vice versa. You know, I think it works in both ways.
Were there any players at Arsenal that you wanted to bring in that it just didn't quite work out with? Any big names?
I say the two biggest names in football, right? Jude Bellingham and then Florian Wirtz at Leverkusen. Yeah. But he was also a player that, of course, like for me it was actually a period where he was at Cologne. He was coming towards the end of his contract. Of course, you could see the level of player he was. But he had also that season quite a few injuries. So he was playing, he wasn't playing. And it was almost like at that point, and it was just not something that they were keen on at that moment, or at least he was keen on pursuing at that moment. I think education is quite important in Germany, and it was almost like he has to finish school. He makes obviously a great move to Leverkusen. Works out again really well for him. Yeah. And probably has the choice of whatever club in the world that would want to sign him, but also achieving great things at Leverkusen as well. Yeah.
So it's the same at Arsenal. You tried to bring Jude to Arsenal as well.
No, not so much Jude.
Oh, okay.
It was more Flo. Yeah. Okay. Jude. The conversation had already happened before I joined.
Oh, okay.
And he had already decided to kind of stay at that point at Birmingham City.
Everyone had tried to sign Jude.
Yeah, it's like it was like you bring Jude to the table and it's like, yeah, we've been there, done that. Like, and I think that was probably one of the players that it's easy to say now because of the level he's playing at. But along with Jude, probably two of the best players I've seen at youth level.
What about Florian Wirtz made you want to sign him specifically?
His technical quality, he was scoring outrageous goals. Every time I went and watched him, he would have just outrageous moments in the game where you're thinking this is not normal. Yeah. And I think, of course, it would hit everyone when you go and watch a player like that he's having these type of moments. But for him, for him to do it on a consistent basis and do it mostly at a level where he's playing for the under-19s, for the B team as an under-16. I think it was also showing that he has a certain level of quality that is different to the rest. If there's ever a criteria you want to build off a player that can make it from the moment where we were watching him, it would be him. I was 30 years old when I got the job, which made me the youngest technical director in Europe.
Is there anyone that stands out in your memory that, specifically, that you thought was going to go right to the top that hasn't quite fulfilled their potential yet for whatever reasons? Anyone stick out in your mind?
I'd probably say Charlie Musunda was one of them. Probably one of the best players, again, I've seen at youth level. But also destined for big things just because of his level of talent. He was a joke. Really? I would also put Callum Hudson-Odoi in that, but Callum is still playing at a good level. He's playing for Nottingham Forest, playing in the Premier League. So I can't say he's not reached certain heights. But with Charlie, he was a joke. You would watch games and you think if there's ever a criteria you want to build off a player that can make it from the moment where we were watching him, it would be him.
Cool. So let's progress from Arsenal now. So how did everything go on from there?
I got to a point where I got approached by one of the shareholders at Den Bosch, and it was via an agent. Initially, the conversation was about me joining as leading recruitment on a multi-club ownership model because he had a few clubs across Europe, and Den Bosch was one of the ones that he was the majority shareholder in.
Can you just give us a bit of background for those who may not know, what club Den Bosch is?
FC Den Bosch is a second division club in Holland. I think one of the things that really drew me towards being involved was their history of developing young players. Obviously, Ruud van Nistelrooy was one player that came through, but that was one of many that ended up having a really good career. But it was almost always at the forefront of their philosophies that they had. And
they got in contact with you whilst you were at Arsenal for an agent?
Yeah, and the majority shareholder at the time also had other clubs in Europe. And initially my role was going to be leading on the recruitment across some of the clubs in the model. And then I met the rest of the shareholders at Den Bosch, and it just became more apparent that they needed someone in that role, and I fit, I guess, the profile that they were looking for. So yeah, it kind of developed very quickly from that point. I did a lot more research around the club. I knew that there was going to be a lot of work to do. I was enthused by the challenge more than anything. I spoke with Les Ferdinand before I went and literally started my role. I think it was like a couple of weeks before. Was fortunate enough to have some time with him at QPR's training ground. Went through my philosophy, spoke about what I wanted to try and implement. And it was a really, really good conversation, just for the basis of getting feedback that I got from him, but also being in senior positions of our background, and getting an insight as to what it's been like for him in his career, but also sharing some of the experiences that I've had as well. And that kind of really prepared me well for then going and doing the role and starting off. I was 30 years old when I got the job, which made me the youngest technical director in Europe. And I think very quickly it was realized when I first came in that we were in a really bad spot. There was a lot of work to do, a lot more than I thought. And it was almost like the second day I expected to come in and there to be a certain level of, I guess, introduction or introduction to a new way of working. Came in, no shareholders, no owners, no one from the board. The CEO was leaving after a month, so he kind of packed up a little bit as well. And I'm literally walking in to a club, never been a technical director before, with no one there, and going, okay, well, now I've got to start my role. So I introduced myself to the staff, the players, kind of just gave a brief introduction, told them what my expectations were more than going into the philosophy. It was more of an introduction. And I remember on the first day, the previous head coach is knocking on my door going, okay, I've got 6 months left till my contract finishes. What are you doing? Some of the senior players in the squad basically come in, introduce themselves, all the best. This ain't going to be easy. So I'm thinking, okay, so from that point onwards, it was almost, let me get to know things. Let me get to understand people, the club, the understanding of how things have worked over the last years. And what became more and more apparent as things went on is that it's in my opinion, a club that's been neglected really on a extreme level when it comes to there being no real goal or ambition or objective set, no real leadership, no investment, no finances being put in that gives you a chance to compete. There's no reason for you to exist in the league other than being a really strong local club. And when I then went into a little bit more detail around that, our under 21 and under 18 coaches are also assistant first team coaches. Our goalkeeping coach is doing under 12s all the way up to first team. We have no performance staff, no video analyst. Our physio is part-time, no nutritionist or guiding players on how to eat. Like training's finished, they're eating cheese toasties after training. And it just became a place where it was almost like, okay, before we go anywhere, this all needs to change because we've got no chance of having any success if we have to work in these parameters. And some of it doesn't take real investment for us to fix. It was almost like, okay, the lady that's making the food is a volunteer. If we can't get a nutritionist in, instead of making cheese toasties, just make pasta. Or give a little bit of guidance because she's willing to help. And so it was smaller changes like this that ended up being bigger changes. Of course, from a financial standpoint, we couldn't invest in the squad. But 2 weeks in, and I'd watched the games previously as well, and I just felt like something needed to change. So obviously joining in the January window, I then basically spoke to 2 players that were out of contract at the end of the season. So basically spoke to them regarding their minutes, game time they're not really playing much. If I now offer you January, February salary, and you was to terminate now and try and find a club in this window, would that be an option? In the end, they both accepted. And then that's how I brought in then Gideon Zelalem in that window, Dennis Kayamfi, Iban Boa on loan. Some of the players that I knew that would just bring just a bit of energy, and I knew them. So it was, for me, this is what we were looking for at that point. It's not how I recruit or wanted to recruit, but I just felt like we needed something in the group for us to at least finish in a finish a season in a way where we're still building on something. So signing Gideon Zelalem, for example, ex-player Ryan Smith, who's a good friend of mine, just basically said to me, look, Gideon is available, have a look. So Gideon was signed at Arsenal at 16, I think, from the States. Was a big prospect as a young player. I think he made his Champions League debut against Galatasaray, I think it was. So a real big prospect, was with their first team every season on pre-season. And fortunately enough, Jack Wilshere and Per had also been in the squads around the time that he was. So I then spoke with them, just a little bit about his character and what they think. They both gave real positive references. We brought him in on trial, and to be fair, like, outstanding player. Like, you just see straight away the level of quality he has for our league was just totally beyond expectation. And I think the biggest thing for him was keeping him fit. He also knew that as well. And that was, for me, then, it was important then for us to know that, of course, bringing a player like that in. So he was kind of a player that was a real hot prospect as a young player. Didn't necessarily fulfill the potential that was expected of him at the time. And it was almost like getting a second wind. And I really wanted to work with him, because not only is he a real talented player, but a really good guy. For us, it was we play Mönchengladbach's B team, we play Ajax first team, we play Go Ahead Eagles, we play like real competitive games. Try and rush the process, because I think a lot of the development is in the experience before that, where you get to the elite level.
How have you gone about like persuading these, talented young footballers to come out to Holland and join your club?
So because
there's multiple, right?
Yeah. So in this window, they were kind of at a point in their careers where they kind of needed something like this as well. With Iban, less so, because he was also playing of course, he was playing for Fulham. Under 21s, he would have had loads of different options to go on loan. But I think with Iban, I met his dad before I actually flew out to Holland, because I kind of wanted to keep him on the radar and maybe look at him for the summer. And I knew, again, he had a French passport, so he would be eligible, etc. But like with him, it was, okay, let's accelerate the process and try and get him in now. But the relationship had already been made with the dad before I actually even flew out. With the rest, they were at a point in their careers where they also needed something like this. We speak about Dennis Gaiamphi as well. Like, also Dennis was at a point where he kind of needed an opportunity like this. Good player, talented. And I think it kind of just fit from both sides. Where then the recruitment changed in the summer was when we were targeting very specifically. And that's when we started to bring in the likes of a Luke Mbete on loan from Man City, Salah from Arsenal, Christian Hedgie from West Ham on loan with no budget. But I think in the end, it was also for us that we had to supplement the squad with loans as well. And that being of a high level, and it helped having worked for some of the clubs, but also have links at the clubs and develop good relationships, that we didn't end up paying anything for them. Of course, obligations for playing time to allow it to be that we don't end up paying anything. But it was also beneficial for the club as well to send a player to us that is going to play. We got to a stage where it was like a month and a half in my role. We were on the end of a very heavy defeat to Pep Zwolle. So it's been commonly spoke about. We lost 13-0. And it was one of the most embarrassing, craziest moments I've ever had in my career. Yeah. But also what was even more is that the lead up to it was not only like months of work that kind of led to that, it was like years. And that was kind of the point where everything showed of where we were as a club. Yeah. And that kind of really then accelerated the process for me. I didn't want to make the manager at the time a scapegoat. So when we did part ways, it was just impossible that we continued because of the way things ended up. I made sure that I met the staff and the players and spoke about responsibilities being on everyone. Like, it's not now that the head coach is gone and that we all just blame him and now everything's going to be okay. So from that moment, of course, the search for a new head coach. In the interim period, the assistant coach takes over. During this phase, we're trying to kind of develop our identity of what we want to try and build from the summer. New head coach comes in. It's like with 6 games to go in the season. And it was from that point onwards where we agreed that we want to professionalize the organization. That's one point, because that then leads to then recruiting players and recruiting the right players. That is a professional enough organization for you to be able to bring certain level of players in and impact their development. But also, that's when then the work started of, we built a new gym, built a new locker room, with the help of sponsors. So we realized at this point, we're not going to get anything from our shareholders. It's not going to happen. There's no point of now complaining about it and waiting for things to change. Like, we roll our sleeves up, we make it work. So we presented to the sponsors and basically said, look, like, I don't even know if you can call it a gym. It was basically a locker room with weights in it. And there's just no way you can get, and you could fit maybe 5 players in there. So if that, to be honest. And I think that's when it was like, okay, if we want to think like this, we also got to have the right facilities. We then present to the sponsors. They then react really positively to it, lucky enough, and help us build the gym. The gym now looks great, but also not only to build a gym, it's then bringing in a head of performance now that runs the gym and runs the program. Yeah. And so it's now starting to put the pieces in place before we get to the summer and start recruiting players, that we know what our identity is. We have a limited budget. We're not now going to go and compete to finish in the top 10, but we need a purpose. Our purpose now is going to be, at this moment, we can only invest in young players because we're not going to convince a player of 30 years old with a family to come in for the salaries we're offering. We go young. We bring in young players that we can develop on one part that we can create value out of and sell in the end. And on the other part, bringing in guys on loan from big clubs that we can then create a reputation in the game, that we are a place that you can also send your talents and we can develop them rather than just give them game time. And what that does then next time in the next conversation is it opens up my hand in having conversations regarding maybe having a sell on, maybe, paying a little bit of the salary and benefiting off certain aspects that would maybe benefit the club down the line in their career.
So how did all these changes, how much of an impact did they have in your time there?
I think probably in the immediate term, you could see that we developed also with the head coach as well a certain way that we wanted to work. We brought the team back earlier for pre-season, and we changed our pre-season program completely. From previously they were playing amateur clubs and winning 10-0 and 8-0, 9-0. For us, it was no, we play Mönchengladbach's B team, we play Ajax first team, we play Go Ahead Eagles, we play like real competitive games across different parts of Europe. And you could see that initially, of course, it was adapting into the process that was difficult, like it would be. But the best players and the right characters for us then thrived in that. And we saw the benefits of, especially some of the players that were there last season, comparing now the impact they're making now, it's definitely helped them as individuals. And even now, sitting quite low in the league for us, we still have an identity of what we wanted to try and create in the initial period, which was developing players, creating revenue. And that's why even still, we weren't winning games consistently, but there's players that are re-signing their contracts that they're up at the end of the season. They're re-signing for 2 years because they want to continue working in this way. They can see that there's going to be benefits at the end. And we saw some examples of that during my time where we would go and play Groningen. Groningen obviously is a huge club. They should never be in our league. They got relegated last season, and we go away from home and beat them 3-0 with an average age of like 21.7. And they've got guys like Bakuna, who's played like for Watford. So I think from that regard, there was also moments where we see there's progress from that point. But the main part was giving us an identity, giving us then the ability to then go into phase 2, which is then, okay, now we are going to bring, instead of bringing in 10 new players that are young and create a foundation, we bring 2-3 experienced ones for the same budget, because there's going to be players that leave that are out of contract. Even if the budget is the same, we can still use that to now bring in 2 or 3 guys that can help the group. And then that was then the next phase for us to then develop our processes and hopefully climb up the table. Because we knew if you want to accelerate that process, you've got to invest, and we're not going to get that. So we needed to find a way.
So sort of take us from that point. You're developing this club. You made all these big changes. Can you sort of bring us up to speed with where we're at now?
Yeah. So we get through I would say a transition season. The key thing for us was that you can't get relegated from our league. So it allows you to have, from what we set at the start of our goal, is that we're focused. Of course, we don't want to drop down the table and stay there, but we can really take our time in developing the foundations. And this is what this kind of season has been so far, is that it's been the development of foundations, a complete way of a change of our way of working, changing personnel, also bringing in guys like Luke and Mbete from Man City, where it ups the level for us, but also from a profile standpoint of the club, also helps us, helps him in terms of his development and games. And that's where kind of we've been at. It's really the first phase of in my opinion, a real long-term project for us to really get to where we want to get to. And when I take it now back to the conversation of my time at Arsenal and having the patience, for me, of course, even having the introduction at Chelsea of the winning mentality, it was almost like, we need to be patient through this. We cannot now start accelerating this process or the expectations quicker than the process allows us to. And this is where it became really important for us to be patient, let the process evolve. And that's where we are now. It's almost like we're coming in to the end of the first part of this transition.
Yeah, you've had interaction with Ruud van Nistelrooy, right?
Yeah, so with Ruud, he was at our first game against Topos, which is our rivals, and connected with him at halftime. Of course, someone of the club that's almost like a product of the club. Of course, he's had an amazing career, but you can see that he cares a lot about the club to also come to the games. I'm sure he lives quite close by. And yeah, it was from that point where we then spoke in regards to him coming in, just open conversations, regarding how he can help. He had left PSV at the time, so he was coming into training, watching training with myself, speaking with the coaches, speaking with players. Having someone like that around is, of course, amazing for the players, but also for me in my role as well, where it gives me perspective from a head coach's also his standpoint of what some of the changes that we were implementing meant for a head coach, which also gave me a lot of insight as to tweaking and adapting certain things as well. Also helped with some contract negotiations with some of the players that we were renewing. Obviously, when Ruud says to sign, you're going to sign.
So you've obviously done this huge transition, things have started to get in place, and then there's a big change. What's happened?
So yeah, look, I decided to leave, and the reasons why was, I think, the lack of clarity when it came to the shareholders and everything around that has always been there while I've been at the club. The club kind of went into a scenario where, because of the lack of investment, we were at a stage where there was a point where we could potentially be bankrupt as a club. And there was a real struggle for the CEO to potentially sign off on even paying the salaries at one point in this month. So we then get new shareholders that want to invest, and they haven't been open in sharing their vision or anything around it. I then have a conversation with the CEO of how much do we know. Our back is against the wall. Again, we need the investment. There was at one point we didn't even know who their first names were. Like we actually didn't know who they were, what they wanted to do, what they wanted to implement, how they wanted to do it. And up until this point, I made a lot of sacrifices from a personal standpoint. My family are still in London. I have 2 kids, wife. It's been a year and a half of real struggle for us as a family because I'm flying back and forth. My son was literally born in the middle of last year whilst all of these changes were happening. So it's not like my wife could just move over as well. And it just became too much uncertainty for me. There was, again, now going, because I felt like we were onto something. And if we are patient, we will get there. But now a change means changes. And with my personal circumstance, I just didn't feel like it was right for me to continue into the unknown a little bit, in not knowing what's going to happen next and continue making these sacrifices in the end.
I see. So you stepped away, essentially. So what's the next step? What does the future hold for you?
Yeah, look, I'm gonna be patient for the right opportunity and whatever works for whoever it is I work for next, and also me. Of course, my ambition is stronger than ever, but I feel like this last year and a half has given me knowledge that I never thought I would get from an experience like this. I knew that it would be challenging and I would learn a lot, but I didn't think it would be like this. So yeah, ready for a challenge. And I would say, like, also to people that I've worked with previously and friends, like, it can't get harder than this, right? But you never know. Yeah, that's where I'm at the moment.
Fair. Are there any sort of common mistakes that you see young players making in their careers that spring to mind? And what advice would you have for them to not make those mistakes?
Probably to not try and rush the process, because I think a lot of the development is in the experience before that. where you get to the elite level. And I think there will be a lot of young players that want to get to that very quickly. And probably the benefits are in maybe that taking a little bit longer and you going through the experiences that you go through. So when you do get to that level, you're able to stay there and continue. The number one mistake footballers would make would be rushing the process.
There aren't many South Asians in football. Why is this, and how do we solve that problem?
That's a big question, because I think there's no real answer to it. I think there's different experiences that different people will have, whether it's internal barriers, whether it's external barriers. And internal, I mean, in regards to kind of family and fighting your way through, but also external barriers of opportunities. I think in terms of how we fix this, I would say the biggest thing would be to make sure that you're prepared. If you're a young South Asian girl, boy who wants to develop their career in football, to go through again, like the education that you need for you to be good enough for the role. Yeah. Because essentially, whether it's big or small, there will be a door that is open for you, and you've just got to be ready at that point to take it. And what I don't like is when there's campaigns are good for different reasons, but almost like you don't need to feel sorry for us. Yeah. Like we do have the ability and we do have the knowledge. We just need to make sure that as a collective, whoever it is, gets to the point where they are able to compete with everyone else from a knowledge standpoint. And of course, it's not always fair. There are always barriers that will be faced for different reasons. But eventually there will be a point where you will be able to break that door down.
Wicked, and we'll cut there, boys. That's fantastic.